Now in today's video, I want to show you a personal finance tracker app that I built. But this is not just any app. There's lots of very interesting goodies in there. And there's especially one interesting technique that I'm really proud of that I can't wait to share with you guys. Now, before we get started, as always, all the apps and all the resources that I discuss on this channel are going to be available to view and or clone from our amazing Patreon community. And if you're still not a member, then you definitely are missing out. You can learn more via the link in the description below the video. All right, so here I am inside of Flutterflow, which is my favorite no-code builder. And before I show you how I actually build this app, let me first show you the app so that you guys can see some of the interesting techniques that I want to teach you today, and then later I'll be showing you how to implement them. All right, so here's the app, and on the first page here, we have here a dashboard, and this dashboard is going to be showing you a couple of widgets, and this first widget is this month's transactions, and this second widget is last month's transactions. And the idea here is that you're going to be showing various pieces of information, specifically in regard to what the person actually wants. So you can customize this in any way that you want. But regardless of what you're going to be showing your users, they're going to be seeing transactions, right? And the idea here for this app is that anytime they spend money, they are going to be entering a transaction. Okay, so for instance, here we have Airbnb in Paris. We have the country here, the country flag, the amount. We have dinner in the US, amount, show in Spain, and the amount, okay? And so regardless what they're going to be doing, they're going to be entering transactions. Now, before I continue, I think it's important to show you my backend, okay? And for that, I decided to use Supabase, which is my favorite backend for all kinds of apps, whether it's simple apps or more complex apps. I definitely recommend Supabase. Now, for this specific project, we are using two tables here. So we have categories and we have transactions. Okay, so for these categories right here, we only have a couple of fields. So we have ID, we have created ad, we have the user ID. So that way, a logged in user can only see their categories. We also have the name, the category name. And in our situation right now, we only have three categories: travel, entertainment, and lodging. The second table I want to show you is transactions. And this table has more fields. So we have transaction ID, we have the user ID, we have the category ID, we have the amount, the date that transaction was completed. We have here a type, and the type here is interesting because I'm also storing an income, right? So most of these are going to be expenses, meaning money leaving your pockets. But also in some situations, you may have some income. Maybe you've gotten a refund somewhere, maybe you overpaid somewhere, so money coming in. But most of these are going to be expenses. We have the description here, created ad, and the country. And the country is going to be a two-letter country code. So US for US, FR for France, ES for España or Spain. And so we have all of these fields. And so these are our two tables that form our backend. Okay, so let's jump back into the app, and we already talked about this main screen here. Let's go ahead and check out the second screen. Okay, so the second screen is a transaction screen, right? We're basically listing our transactions, and because we're using a data table here, as is the case on the first screen as well, we have some nice features. We have pagination. Here we can paginate. You can select how many items you want to see per page. Let's say you want to see 50, and now you're seeing 50. You can kind of scroll through them, and you can also delete any of these transactions, or you can add a new one. So if you click here, you're going to have this little pop-up where you can select a category, fill out the fields, and you're going to add a new transaction. So all in all, a pretty standard page here, okay? But things get interesting when we check out this page here, this manage categories flow. And this is something that I'm actually fairly proud of, because I actually wanted to do this for quite a while. I just wasn't sure where I can do it until I realized that I can do it in this app. And so the idea here is that we are looking at the three categories, and for each category, we are looking at the transactions. And so let's say you're looking at some of these transactions, and you decide, well, clothing is not travel, but clothing is entertainment. Okay, so what you can do is you can drag and drop it right here. When you do that, it automatically recategorizes it. So now you're seeing clothing here. Okay, so let's say you are looking at books and you say, well, books is not travel. Books is really entertainment. So you can do the same thing, drag and drop it, and you're seeing books here now. And so you can also scroll to the right and you can do the same thing with some of these other categories. So let's say lodging. Okay, so like you look at salary and you realize, well, salary is not lodging, salary is something else. So you can drag and drop it to entertainment or something like this. Now, it's important to point out that this is completely dynamic. So even if you change the device, you're still gonna see all of these aligned correctly, right? And if you make it desktop, you're going to be seeing more of them, right? Because your real estate increases. So regardless how many categories you have, they're all going to look very, very similar, regardless what device you're going to be using. Now, this space here, this is something that you can configure. I've set it fairly, to a fairly big number. We can decrease it if we want, but it's important to realize that by default, you're not going to have this behavior. You need to use a couple of tricks that I'm going to be showing you a little bit later in the video. Okay, so this is a really, really nice flow that I wanted to implement for quite a while, and now you have it, and you guys can take advantage of this. Okay, now continuing on to the last page, this is the reports page, and here you can see various graphs, various stats that have to do with your transactions. Okay, so with Flutterflow, you have built-in chart widgets. Okay, so you can create a pie chart, a line chart, or a bar chart. So we have a bar chart here and we have a pie chart here. So this bar chart here basically lists the first like 10 transactions, and so here you're seeing the price, and here you're seeing the date. So this is January 1st, January 10, 11, 12, etc., etc. Now here, this is an interesting chart because it basically aggregates all the data and groups it by the country. Okay, so this is Spain. And as you can see, 29% of all transactions are related to Spain. For France, we have 39%, and for US, we have 32%. So as you can see, they're fairly close to each other. And the reason for that is I actually had all the transactions generated by ChatGPT. And ChatGPT tends to kind of cycle through the categories that you give it. So it allocates equal amount of items to each of these categories. And by the way, if you're a member of our incredible, rapidly growing Patreon community, you will also get access to, in addition to this app, I'm also going to make available a ChatGPT Convo that I use to build out this app. And trust me, you definitely do not want to miss that. Lots and lots of interesting goodies there. Okay, so that's the 4 pages that we have to this app, and as you can see, each page does something interesting, displays data in an interesting way, allows the user to interact with the app in a unique fashion. Okay, so now that we've seen the app, let's jump back into Flutterflow and let me show you how I built this app. Now, the first thing that you need to do is you need to connect your Supabase, right? So we already did that. As you can see, I have my API URL as well as my Anon key connected. So once we have connected, we can start pulling the data here. Now, these 2 widgets here are actually data table widgets, and they're awesome when it comes to displaying tabular data. Okay, so anytime you have some structured data that you want to display, spreadsheet style, I definitely recommend using these data table widgets because they give you a lot of these functionality for absolutely free. Now, whenever you're going to be using data table, you have to realize that a data table cannot be fed with external data, right? So unlike a list view, which has this tab here that allows you to feed with external data, you cannot feed data table with external data. You can only feed it with internal data. Okay, and that is why at the top level I'm doing a query to get all my transactions, right? Like a basic query. And that way I can make all the data available to these data table widgets, right? So if we click on this first widget, we can simply feed it this data. Now, I'm not just feeding it, I am actually filtering this data, right? Because remember, this is this month's transactions. And so what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're only displaying the data for this month, and I'm doing that via filtering, right? So anytime you are using this, generating children from a variable, you have lots of things that you can use: mapping, filtering, sorting, unique, etc., etc. So I'm using filtering, and I'm saying I only want the transactions where date is greater than or equal to this month, right? And this is actually a custom function that returns the first date of the current month. Okay, and so if we take a look here, you can edit this function, and you can see it's just a one-liner whose job it is to return the first day of the current month. And that way, this logic is going to work, right? Because we are saying that we want to fill it. We just want to display the items whose date is greater than or equal to, that first date of the month. And that's pretty much the transactions that happened this month. Okay, next month, it's going to be transactions next month. Okay, so that is how we're displaying these transactions. Now for last month, we're doing something similar, except we have two conditions, because now we need a range where a transaction is greater than or equal to the first date of the previous month, but it's also less than or equal to the last date of the previous month. Okay, and that is exactly what we're doing here. We're actually using another function that gets us the last month, right? It basically gives us the first day of the last month as well as the last day of the last month. And as a result, we can have this really nice filtering here. Okay, so that is this first page here. Now the second page is the transactions page, and this is fairly standard. We've done this before. We're simply displaying all the transactions, and thanks to this data table widget, we can, do pagination. We can do all kinds of interesting things. And here we have, the ability to delete a transaction, as well as, the ability to add a new transaction by opening up this component here that I have here, this component here. Okay, so that is a very, very standard flow. Now, things get interesting when we get to category manage, okay? And this is the part that I spent the most time on, okay? Because it's fairly tricky. Now, like I mentioned in the demo, this is completely dynamic, okay? So regardless of how many categories you have, regardless of how many transactions you have per category, they're all going to be displaying. This is not hard coded, right? I'm not hard coding anything. So everything is completely dynamic, and this introduces some very, very interesting problems. The first issue that you're going to have if you want to do kind of the same thing that I'm doing here is whenever you're using a list view, you need to make sure that you wrap it in a container. And when you wrap it in a container, you can give it a defined width and or height, and that is because a list view by itself, it cannot exist just by itself, right? It needs to have kind of a fixed height or a fixed width, right? Because a list view, it's dynamic. And so as a result, we have the first list view inside of this row here, with the second list view inside this container, and this container sets the bounds for each of the columns that we have. So here in this width setting, what I've done is I'm basically doing a formula where I'm saying, well, you can take the screen width and divide it by the number of columns. And I'm also adding a buffer, and that is why you saw a lot of space there, because if I remove this buffer, they're going to be a lot closer together. So you can kind of play with this buffer, to see what makes more sense for your specific use case, app use case. But this is very important, right? We are going to be taking the screen width, and we have this thing as part of a global property in Flutterflow, and we're going to divide it by the number of columns. And so what is the number of columns? Well, number of columns is basically categories, right? How many categories we have, right? We basically take the number of categories, and that's the number of columns that we want to have. And all of that is, we take the screen width and divide that by the number of categories. And as a result, you have this really responsive behavior. Now, you can't see it here, because if I expand it, you see how they're all kind of bunched into the left. And if I do this, they're all kind of bunched into the left. But when you run the app, you're going to be seeing this behavior, because that is not possible to see it right here. That can only be possible when you actually run this app. And as a result, you have this really, really nice behavior, very responsive behavior. Another thing I'm doing here is this drag and drop functionality. So all of these things here are wrapped with a draggable, and this whole column is wrapped with a drag target. And actually our draggables is a Supabase row because we're passing around transactions. And so that's the only thing we care about, right? So if we can pass the whole row, even better, because the row has all the information that we need. So we're basically passing this these Supabase rows from the transactions table, and here we're catching them. So it's the same data type here. Now, in this drag target, we have a couple of interesting things happening, right? So on drag except, whenever, one item is dragged to another one, we are updating the database, okay? We're basically setting the category ID to the new ID of the categories row. So because, all of these things, right, because we have kind of a nested list view, all the fields here, they know which category they belong to. And as a result, when we drag an item, this specific item, it knows which category it falls into, right? Because, this drag target is under this list view here, which basically fetches the categories. And as a result, we have this really, really cool behavior, right? Where we can drag and drop, and they're automatically saved in the backend. The category ID is automatically updated, and it works really, really nicely this way. So moving right along to reports, this is where I decided to show you some report functionality. And so here we have a couple of charts. Like I mentioned before, these are supported by Flutterflow. So we have here a bar chart, and here we have a pie chart. And when you're working with charts, you need to pass a series, right? So here we have one series. You can pass multiple series, but each series needs two pieces of data. It needs the labels and it needs the actual values, right? So if we expand it, you can see that we're working with number lists, and here we have bar labels, and here we have bar values here. Now for bar labels, we are using the date of each transaction, and that way there's a date that's being displayed in this axis here. And so what we're doing is we're taking the transactions, we're mapping them into this special format here, because we don't want to display just the standard date. We want a special format. Next, we sort the dates, and we only take out 10 items. And when it comes to the bar values, we're doing something very similar, except we're first sorting by the date, and then we're just, picking the amounts here, and we're only displaying the first 10 items for brevity. Now for the pie chart here, we're doing something very, very similar, except now we are using aggregate data. Okay, so we don't, we just want to display the subtotals, right? The aggregate stuff for each country. So I want to see, like, my spending, my transactions in Spain, France, and US as a percentage of the total transactions, right? As a percentage of all the transactions. And so if we come back here, we have it set up very, very similarly, except we are using a custom function to get us the values. Now for the labels, we don't need a custom function. We can simply get the country, we can just unique it, because if you don't unique it, you're going to be seeing like 50 different labels where the countries are going to be repeating themselves. And here you can just unique them, and then you can just sort them by the country. And when you sort them, you have it in order, right? So ES comes first, followed by FR, and then US here. Now when it comes to the actual values, this is where you need to do something special. And what I have here is a custom function called get amount by country, that when you feed it all the transactions, it's going to calculate it, how many transactions happen here, how many there happen there, and we are also sorting it in an order, and that way we can just display it here, and they're going to match up with the legend here. So if we open up this thing here, you're going to see this custom function here that I use ChatGPT to generate for me. And as I mentioned previously, when you join our amazing Patreon community, you're going to have access to my ChatGPT Convo. And this way you're going to get access to my entire thought process that, I was working on while I was, solving all kinds of problems in order to build out this app. And that is pretty cool, actually. You're gonna see a lot of interesting nuggets that I struggled with and I use ChatGPT to help me out. Okay, so as a result, we have a very nice kind of presentation here. We have one graph here and a pie chart here. All right, and that was my personal finance tracking app. Now, obviously, this app can be used in lots of different ways. You can use it as a starter package for your own app. Maybe you want to add some more features to it, or maybe you want to check out some of the functionality that I used here and use it in your own apps. The choice is completely yours, but regardless what you decide, you definitely want to be able to get access to this app so that you can clone it, add it to your own library, so that you don't need to start from scratch and use some of the techniques that I've implemented here in your own apps. And you can do just that when you join our amazing Patreon community, because when you join our amazing Patreon community, you're not only going to get access to this app plus my ChatGPT Convo, you're also going to get access to all my other apps that I talked about on this channel. They're all there and they're waiting for you to view and or clone them. In addition to that, you're going to get access to extra content. Plus, you're going to be supporting this channel and supporting my work. And you're going to be part of an amazing no-code community with some incredible people there eager to learn, eager to take their no-code game to the next level. So if this sounds like something that you might be interested in, then definitely check out our amazing Patreon community and consider becoming a member. And you can do just that via the link in the description below the video.